Need for Speed Most Wanted, quite possibly the most iconic game ever in the Need for Speed franchise. It's all released in 2005 on a variety of different systems, with the PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, Windows PC, PlayStation Portable, even as far as handheld systems with the Nintendo DS and the Game Boy Advance. The PlayStation Portable or PSP version would gain an additional title that would be reflective of Most Wanted under 510 that featured alternative gameplay, but again focusing on street racing. It added more of the same, but also tried to provide a different take on the story element seen within this iconic game. And following on the huge success seen in Underground 2, which up until that point was the best game in the series, and still to this day is one of the best racing games quite possibly ever made. But Most Wanted expanded on that even further again, while moving away from the underground scene of nighttime racing to focus more so on daytime events, but involved a whole new detailed story around the fictional city of Rockport, where you as the main protagonist and driver faces off against a whole host of different racers with the aim to compete and defeat 15 of the most elite racers that are on a list otherwise known as the Blacklist. But in the early stages of the story, you meet one of the members who also has his own agendas, who ends up eventually becoming the number one guy on the list itself, but he also uses your car or steals your car in order to gain that advantage. So that's where the story will take place, where you pretty much have to restart from the bottom and work your way up. And very like in the Underground games, you will gain access to a whole host of different types of cars, anything from tuner cars, hot hatches, and would also see a return of more exotic style cars from previous Need for Speed games, with the likes of Lamborghini, Mercedes, even the Ford GT. And very like other games in the series, you would also have a variety of different modes to compensate alongside the career mode itself, with time trials, quick races, challenge series, multiplayer elements. This game as well, because when it was released around the time of the Xbox 360, you could also play the game online in multiplayer. And while you could do that essentially in the likes of Need for Speed Underground 2, the online capabilities in this game would have been far superior. But the story is very interesting in how it presents itself, even in terms of the acting, because it is a really good cast of actors. The story is well written and it really suits the overall aesthetic that the game is going for. If anything, it's probably the best refined story out of any game in the Need for Speed franchise, even to the current day. So much in a way that even as of now, and speaking with this video, this game did receive incredible reviews across the board, while again it still has some inherent flaws, especially later on in the game when it does become more challenging. But aside from those subtle issues, graphically it was the best looking game of its type in the Need for Speed franchise ever. But it's also the best selling game ever in the series, even to the current day, selling well over 18 million copies worldwide. Anyone that thinks of Need for Speed in the modern format often refers to this game in particular, and in many other cases it would be Underground 2. If you ever tried to define Need for Speed franchise, those would be the two games that will come up the most. Now don't get me wrong, there are some decent games that have popped up over the years, but I still think that Most Wanted, this here, the first Most Wanted that came out in 2005, and Underground 2 are the two best games in the entire series. But what's interesting about this game is that the sequel to Most Wanted, with Need for Speed Carbon, that would follow up a year later, would be a direct sequel to this game that would also follow along the same storyline presented here, which would have been a first for a Need for Speed game. It was very unusual to see two games follow the same storyline, because usually they'd have only a one-time story with each game and then it would move on to something else. That was very unique in how it approached it. And while Carbon wasn't really as highly rated compared to Most Wanted, but it was still a good solid title in the grand scheme of things, it really was. But yeah, Most Wanted I think is definitely the best of all the Need for Speed games, especially during the PS2 era. Underground 2 is very, very close to it, make no mistake about that. For me personally, they're my two favourite games during this generation to play from the Need for Speed universe. The graphics in this game for its time were phenomenal. They were among some of the best you would ever see in a video game. The level of detail just in the environments and everything, the surrounding, the aesthetics was just on another level, it really was. And it still holds up very well today, mind you, it really does, even for a PS2 game. Now it would have been equally bettered with the fact is that the game was released on the Xbox 360, which was a far more powerful console, so it would have brought the visuals to a whole new level on that system.
be advised.
But yeah, this is without a doubt one of the greatest racing games ever made, hands down. Make no mistake about that. Great use of cars, great visuals. Also, this has, without a doubt, one of the greatest soundtracks ever in a video game as well. That even does trump the previous entries in the list, which in fairness is a hard thing to do because the majority of Need for Speed games always do have good soundtracks, but this thing really just trumps everything that's out there. Even pretty much everything that came after it. It's just so iconic. I remember putting a lot of time into this game. A lot. I played this equally as much as I've played pretty much any Need for Speed game ever. It's so good. And even going back to recording footage for this video, I found myself thinking that I would only play it for a few minutes, and I ended up playing it for almost 2 hours. So that'll give you an idea of how much this game can draw you in. And considering I haven't played this game in a couple of years, it's as good as I remember. There's so many modes, there's so many features, there's so much unlockable content that it will keep you busy for a long time. And regardless of which version that you played the game on, you knew that you were in for a treat, as the game was praised across all systems it released on. While yes, there were limitations on the likes of the handheld systems, but there were still good alternatives if you couldn't gain access to the more powerful consoles. Yeah, a very, very cool game. One of the best ever made, quite possibly the greatest in the Need for Speed universe, and for many it was the last true great game in the entire series. While many other games have come after it, they never really quite hit the success or the popularity that this game represented. In all honesty, this game set the bar so high that I don't think it could have been bettered. I don't think it can be bettered in many ways. Even now, when you look at all the glitz and glamour surrounding video games, even the Need for Speed games themselves in the current generations are not able to match this on that level. They really aren't, which is a pity. But I think this was the perfect game to come out at the perfect time, and it was during quite possibly the most rebellious time in video games, and the game just fitted right in with that whole dynamic. If anything, the PS2 era is quite possibly regarded as the greatest era for experimental games, but even just the Need for Speed franchise in general. In many ways, this game's a masterpiece, and it's definitely worth a go. Whether you're a fan that wants to go and revisit it, or whether you're playing this for the first time, you need to give this game a go. But regardless of what I think, which I think this is an amazing game, I would love to know your thoughts of this iconic masterpiece and what do you think of it overall. Is it your favourite Need for Speed game in the franchise also, like myself, or what other games in the series are you more fond of? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other Need for Speed games that were also released on the PS2, you can check out this playlist right here.